Hey guys, tonight we look at the clock. Imagine it. The stadium lights feel hotter, brighter, somehow more accusing than they did 90 minutes ago. The collective breath of 80,000 people is trapped in their throats. The referee, a man suddenly imbued with the power of a minor deity, glances at his wrist. 90 minutes are gone. This is the wasteland. The place where rigid tactics dissolve, where superstars become frantic amateurs, and where frantic amateurs can become immortal. This is stoppage time, the few minutes of allocated chaos tacked onto the end of a match, and it is the most potent, condensed form of drama sport has to offer. The odds of you witnessing a season-defining, history-altering goal in this tiny window are infinitesimal. You probably won't survive this level of anxiety without checking your heart rate. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment and let us all know what city or country you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. This strange, elastic window of time wasn't always a source of such high drama. But in the 1990s, one team and one man weaponized it. They turned the fourth official's glowing board into a psychological cudgel. The team was Manchester United and the man was their manager, Sir Alex Ferguson. The phenomenon became known, whispered first with respect, then with dread, as Fergie time. It was a concept built on a simple, terrifying premise. Manchester United do not stop, ever. While other teams, protecting a lead, would try to run the clock down, hoofing the ball into the stands or faking an injury over a stubbed toe, United would attack. While other teams, chasing a goal, would grow frantic and sloppy, United would become sharper, more focused, driven by the relentless, gum-chewing, watch-tapping presence on their touchline. Ferguson would stand there, pointing theatrically at his watch, a piece of silent theatre directed at the officials. It was a message. We know we need more time. Give it to us. And it felt like they always got it. Analysts still argue whether Fergie time was a statistical reality, born of United's relentless attacking style forcing more stoppages, or a self-fulfilling psychological prophecy. Did referees genuinely add more time for United? The data is debatable, but it doesn't matter. The opponents believed it, the fans believed it, and most importantly the United players believed it. When that board went up, the opposing defenders would visibly shrink. Their legs, already heavy from 90 minutes of chasing United's wingers, would suddenly feel like they were encased in wet concrete. Their goalkeeper, so confident moments before, would start glancing nervously over his shoulder, and for United, it was the opposite. It was a dinner bell. It was permission to abandon all restraint and throw everything, including the proverbial kitchen sink at the enemy goal. This belief, this aura of inevitability was more powerful than any tactic. It was alchemy. And never was this alchemy more needed than on the humid evening of May 26, 1999. The stage was the Camp Nou in Barcelona. The event was the UEFA Champions League final. Manchester United, having already clawed their way to the Premier League title and won the FA Cup, stood on the brink of a feat never ever achieved by an English club, the treble. This wasn't just about winning a trophy, it was about securing a place in eternity. The only thing standing in their way was a monolithic obstacle, Bayern Munich. Bayern were the anti-United. They were a machine of calculated German efficiency, ruthless, organised, and utterly devoid of the romantic chaos that defined Ferguson's side. They were giants, men like Stefan Effenberg, Oliver Kahn, and Lothar Matthäus, names that sounded less like footballers and more like ancient Teutonic warriors. Worse, United were crippled. Their two most important players, the heartbeat and the brain of their midfield, Roy Keane and Paul Scholes, were both suspended. It was like sending a knight into battle without his sword or his shield. The team that walked onto the pitch that night was a patched-up makeshift unit, running on fumes and sheer willpower. The script, it seemed, had already been written, and it was a tragedy. Just 6 minutes into the match, Bayern's midfielder Mario Basler, a man who always looked like he'd just won a bet, stepped up for a free kick. It was clever, cheeky and low. He curled it around the wall, and the unsighted Peter Schmeichel, United's giant Danish goalkeeper, could only watch it nestle into the corner of his net, 1-0 to Bayern. For the next 84 minutes, what unfolded was not a contest. It was a slow, methodical dissection. United were flat, exhausted, and devoid of ideas. Bayern, comfortable in their lead, simply picked them apart. They toyed with them. They struck the woodwork twice. Mehmet Scholl hit the post with an audacious chip. Kastenjanka rattled the crossbar with an overhead kick that would have been one of the greatest final goals ever. It was a humiliation disguised as a 1-0. The United fans, tens of thousands of them, sat in stunned silence, their red flags drooping. The dream was dead. As the match limped towards the 90th minute, the television commentators had already begun reading Bayern's eulogy, praising their professionalism and dominance. A quirky and painful tidbit of the night. UEFA officials, in their infinite wisdom, had already tied Bayern Munich's ribbons onto the handles of the enormous Champions League trophy. They brought it down from the stands and paraded it along the touchline, right past Ferguson's dugout, to prepare for the presentation. The engraver was metaphorically sharpening his tools, ready to carve the German name into the silver. Ferguson, a man who subsisted on the impossible, had made his final desperate throws of the dice. He had sent on 2 substitutes, Teddy Sheringham and old Gunnar Solskjær. They were known as super subs, but this felt less like a tactical masterstroke and more like a changing of the guard, a chance for the starters to be spared the final whistle. The 4th official, a man oblivious to the history he was about to set in motion, raised his electronic board. It glowed with a single insulting number. 3 minutes. 3 minutes of added time. For Bayern, it was 180 seconds to survive. For United, it was 180 seconds to score 2 goals against a team that hadn't looked like conceding one all night. It was impossible. It was over. The 90 minutes were up. The clock had ticked past the allotted time, and now that glowing red 3 was the only thing that mattered. It was a countdown to Bayern's coronation. The German fans, thousands of them, were already celebrating, their scarves whirling, a sea of arrogant, triumphant red and white. They had been the better team. They deserved it. On the Bayern bench, their talismanic captain, Lothar Matthäus, had been substituted off with 10 minutes to go. He was 38 years old, a legend of the game, and his manager wanted to grant him a standing ovation in his final Champions League appearance. He sat on the bench, a picture of calm satisfaction, watching the trophy, his trophy, being prepared. United, driven by a primal instinct rather than any coherent plan, surged forward. They were a cornered animal. They won a corner. It was 90 seconds past the 90-minute mark. In a final desperate act of glorious absurdity, United's goalkeeper, the 6'4" giant Peter Schmeichel, sprinted the length of the pitch and joined the attack, leaving his own goal completely, terrifyingly empty. If Bayern cleared this, they could shoot into an open net from their own half. But it didn't matter. This was the last throw. David Beckham, a man who had run his legs into the ground for an hour and a half, found one last reserve of energy. He trotted over. He didn't whip it in with his usual pace. It was a hopeful looping cross aimed at the mass of bodies. The Bayern defence, so imperious all night, suddenly looked clumsy. The towering Schmeichel leapt, causing chaos, and the ball was headed out, but only partially. It fell to Ryan Giggs on the edge of the box. His tired legs couldn't muster any power. He scuffed a right-footed shot, a weak, bobbling effort that looked like the final pathetic whimper of a dying dream. But it was not the end. It was the catalyst. The scuffed shot trickled almost apologetically into the path of Teddy Sheringham. The substitute, who had been on the pitch for 24 minutes and done nothing, was standing in the 6-yard box. In one fluid, almost lazy motion, he swiveled on the spot. He didn't even look at the goal. He just swung his right foot, connecting perfectly. The ball flew low, past the despairing dive of Oliver Kahn, and nestled into the bottom corner of the net. 90-36. 1-1. The stadium detonated. A sound unlike anything. It was a raw, primal scream of disbelief from the United end. From the Bayern end, a sudden, piercing, terrible silence. On the pitch, Oliver Kahn, the colossal, intimidating goalkeeper, scrambled to his feet and began screaming, his face a mask of apoplectic rage, roaring at his defenders who were now staring at each other with wide, panicked eyes. The commentators, who had been reading Bayern's obituary, lost their minds. "Name on the trophy!" bellowed ITV's Clive Tildesley, a phrase that would become legendary. For a moment it seemed like that was it. A draw. United had saved themselves from defeat and would force 30 minutes of extra time. It was a miracle in itself. But Sir Alex Ferguson was not celebrating a draw. He was a predator who had smelled blood. As his players celebrated, he was already on the touchline, yelling at them to get back, to reset. There was still time. From the restart, Bayern Munich, for the first time all night, looked terrified. They were in shock, their composure shattered, their brains scrambled. They kicked off. United won the ball back almost instantly, and the attack was on again. Old Gunnar Solskjær, the other substitute, the baby-faced assassin, made a frantic, jagged run down the right flank. He tried to cross. A Bayern defender slid in, and another corner. It was now 92 minutes and 5 seconds. There were perhaps 55 seconds of the allotted 3 minutes left. David Beckham, again. He jogged over, the boos and whistles from the Bayern fans now sounding less confident, more like a desperate plea. He took a deep breath. This time, the cross was perfect. It was flat, hard, and arrowed towards the near post. Teddy Sheringham, buzzing with adrenaline, rose first. He met the ball, not to score but to flick it on. A glancing header that sent it looping over the defence and into the 6-yard box. And there, waiting, was Solskjær. A quirky, fascinating tidbit about the Norwegian striker. He was a meticulous student of the game, known for spending hours watching videos of opposing defenders. But this was not thought. This was not study. This was pure, predatory instinct. As the ball dropped from the heavens, he reacted, sticking out his right foot, catching the ball on the half volley. He just poked it. He guided it. The ball rocketed, not into the corner, but straight up into the roof of the net. 92-17. 2-1. Manchester United. What followed was not a celebration. It was a societal collapse. Solskjær, in a moment of pure, unadulterated ecstasy, sprinted to the corner flag and performed a knee slide that would be emulated by schoolchildren for decades. Peter Schmeichel, still in the other penalty box, seeing the net bulge from 100 yards away, did a celebratory cartwheel, a move of such absurd, childlike joy that it perfectly captured the moment. Ferguson, on the touchline, turned to his assistant, his words lost to the din, a look of simple, profound shock on his face. And the camera, cruelly, found the Germans. Samuel Kuffour, Bayern's powerhouse defender, was on the ground, hammering the turf with his fist over and over, weeping in uncontrollable animalistic grief. Carsten Janker, the giant striker, simply stood still, vacant, his eyes wide, unable to process the reality. Oliver Kahn was frozen, leaning against his goalpost, a statue of defeated rage. Historians and analysts still argue whether Bayern's collapse was a tactical failure, a result of the veteran Matthäus being subbed off, or simply the most profound case of psychological choking ever witnessed. The game was over. The referee, Pierluigi Collina, whose own face was a picture of astonishment, allowed Bayern to kick off one last time, then immediately blew the whistle. It had taken 102 seconds, 2 substitutes, 2 corners, 1 dream. United had not just won the Champions League, they had stolen it. They had completed the impossible treble in the most impossible way imaginable. The legend of Fergie time was no longer a myth, it was a gospel. That night in Barcelona was the birth of a modern legend, a story of snatching victory from the jaws of a celebration already in progress. It was a heist, pure and simple, conducted in the dying embers of a match. But a decade earlier, before the gleaming corporate monolith of the Champions League, before the global spectacle of the Premier League, the English First Division served up a climax so statistically absurd, so emotionally raw, that it remains the blueprint for all last-day drama. This wasn't a cup final, a one-off bout for a silver pot. This was the gruelling 38-game marathon of a league season, coming down to its final 90 minutes, with the 2 contenders facing each other in a winner-take-all showdown. The date was May 26, 1989. The stadium was Anfield, the intimidating, almost mythical fortress of Liverpool Football Club. Liverpool were not just a team, they were a dynasty. They were the undisputed kings of English football, having dominated the 1980s with a slick passing style that left opponents mesmerised and, more often than not, beaten. Their opponents were Arsenal, a team from London managed by the pragmatic, stern and deeply unfashionable George Graham. Arsenal were the challengers, the pretenders, a side built on defensive solidity and relentless organisation, the complete antithesis of Liverpool's free-flowing poetry. The match itself should never have happened this way. It was the final game of the season, postponed and rescheduled due to the darkest shadow in English sporting history. Just 5 weeks prior, on April 15th, the FA Cup semi-final at Hillsborough Stadium had turned into a human catastrophe, resulting in the deaths of 97 Liverpool fans. The sport, the city and the nation were deep in mourning. Liverpool, the team representing a grieving city, had carried on with an impossible emotional burden, and somehow they had kept winning. Their journey to this final day was one of resilience, tragedy and immense psychic weight. Now, on this bizarre Friday night, the equation for the league title was brutally simple and brutally stacked against the visitors. Liverpool were 3 points clear at the top of the table. Arsenal in second had to go to Anfield, a place where Liverpool had not lost by 2 clear goals in over 3 years, and win by 2 clear goals. A 1-0 victory for Arsenal wouldn't be enough. The title would still go to Liverpool on goal difference. A 2-1 victory wouldn't be enough. It would go to Liverpool on goals scored. Only 2-0, 3-1 or a scoreline of similar improbable magnitude would snatch the championship trophy, which was, of course, already at Anfield, ready for its red ribbons. The task was considered impossible. The media had written Arsenal off. The Liverpool players, legends like John Barnes, Ian Rush and Alan Hansen, were preparing for a coronation, a moment of light for their city after so much darkness. George Graham, however, had a plan. A fascinating, and at the time, quirky tidbit is that Graham, a meticulous planner, had his team practice their shape and tactics based on being 1-0 up at half-time. He broke the game down, believing the impossible could be achieved in stages. He famously told his players, "Don't let them score. Get one in the second half, the last 10 minutes, it will be chaos. Anything can happen in the chaos." The first half was a tense, grinding affair. Arsenal, to the surprise of many, controlled the tempo. They were not frantic. They were patient, disciplined, and stuck to their manager's script. Liverpool, perhaps expecting an all-out suicidal assault, seemed oddly passive. The whistle blew for half-time, 0-0. The impossible task had just become absurd. Arsenal now had 45 minutes to score 2 goals at Anfield. As the players walked off, the camera caught Arsenal's midfielder, Michael Thomas, patting his teammate David Rocastle on the back, a gesture of "it's okay, we're still in this." The second half began. Arsenal, knowing they had to open up, pushed forward. 7 minutes in, at the 52-minute mark, they won a free kick on the right-hand side. Nigel Winterburn, the left-back, trotted over to take it. He whipped in a dangerous curling ball. The Arsenal striker, Alan Smith, with his distinctive blonde moustache, rose between 2 defenders and glanced a header. The ball flew past Liverpool's eccentric goalkeeper, Bruce Grobbelaar, and into the net, 1-0 to Arsenal, pandemonium. But also controversy. The Liverpool players, led by their goalkeeper, immediately surrounded the referee. They were screaming for offside, claiming Smith hadn't touched the ball and that another Arsenal player in an offside position had interfered. Commentators and analysts still argue over the goal to this day. Did Smith get the faintest of touches to divert the ball, or was it a ghost goal that should have been disallowed? The referee, after a long, tense consultation with his linesman, pointed to the centre circle. The goal stood. Suddenly, George Graham's prophecy was coming true. It was 1-0. The impossible was now merely improbable. The dynamic of the stadium shifted. The confident celebratory air in the Liverpool stands was replaced by a low, anxious murmur, but Liverpool were still champions. All they had to do was hold on, and they were masters of holding on. The clock became the enemy. The minutes drained away. 70 minutes, 80 minutes, 85 minutes. Arsenal were frantic now, their disciplined plan dissolving into a desperate kitchen sink assault. Liverpool, masters of the dark arts, were slowing the game down. Grobbelaar took an age on his goal kicks. Players went down with injuries. The home fans were whistling, a deafening, piercing sound begging the referee to end the game. The 90-minute mark arrived. The championship was Liverpool's. The title was staying at Anfield. The Arsenal players looked broken, their incredible effort just not enough. The TV commentator Brian Moore began to read the eulogy for their season. Arsenal are running out of time. The fourth official's board went up. 3 minutes of stoppage time, a small eternity, but not enough. Liverpool cleared the ball. Arsenal's goalkeeper, John Lukic, grabbed it. He didn't punt it. He threw it quickly to his defender, Lee Dixon. This was it. The last desperate heave. Dixon looked up and saw no options. He launched a long, hopeful ball forward, a Hail Mary pass into the Liverpool half. It found Alan Smith, the scorer of the first goal. He cushioned it perfectly, chesting it down. The ball bounced, and suddenly breaking from midfield was Michael Thomas, the man who had been so calm at half-time. He'd had a golden chance just minutes earlier and fluffed it, a moment that should have been the final nail in the coffin. But here he was again. He surged past the last Liverpool defender, Steve Nicol. In that second, time stretched. The entire stadium, the millions watching on television, held their breath. Brian Moore, the commentator, uttered the line that would define the sport. Thomas, charging through the midfield. Thomas, it's up for grabs now. Thomas was in, one-on-one with Grobler. He had too much time. He could hear his teammates screaming at him to shoot. The keeper, famous for his spaghetti legs antics, came sprawling out. Thomas let the ball bounce once. He let it bounce twice. He was almost too close. And then, at 91 minutes and 25 seconds, with the last meaningful kick of the entire 1988-89 season, he lifted the ball. It was not a shot. It was a deft, delicate, almost arrogant flick. The ball sailed over Grobbelaar's shoulder and rolled with agonising cinematic slowness into the empty net. 2-0. Silence. A split second of profound, collective, disbelieving silence. Then an explosion. Thomas wheeled away, his arms outstretched, a look of pure, uncomprehending shock on his face, before he was buried under a pile of blue and yellow away shirts. The Arsenal fans, a tiny pocket in the corner of the stadium, were a riot of limbs. The Liverpool players, 90 seconds from glory, just collapsed. They fell to the turf, their faces buried in the grass, utterly, completely and publicly poleaxed. It was, and for many still is, the single most dramatic moment in English League history. A team needing a specific 2-goal margin away from home against the champions and getting the deciding goal with the final attack of the season. It was statistically laughable. It was football distilled to its most potent, cruel and beautiful essence. The explosion of joy at Anfield in 1989 was a domestic affair, a battle between two houses for a national crown. It was intense, it was personal, but it was, in the end, about club bragging rights. There is another level of pressure, a deeper, heavier, more suffocating weight. It is the pressure of the nation. It's the anxiety of millions, the hopes of an entire country, focused down like a magnifying glass onto 11 men, and sometimes onto just one. When a club loses, a city is sad. When a country fails, it triggers a national mourning, a period of inquest and finger-pointing that can border on hysteria. And for one man, that hysteria was not a hypothetical. He had lived it. His name was David Beckham, and in 2001 he was not just a footballer, he was the most famous man in England, arguably the world. He was a pop culture icon, a fashion plate, and the captain of his country. But he was also a man carrying a heavy, heavy debt. The mainstream historical fact here is a dark one. 3 years earlier, at the 1998 World Cup in France, Beckham had been the villain. In a fiery knockout match against bitter rivals Argentina, a young, petulant Beckham, still more boy than man, had been sent off. Lying on the ground, he had petulantly kicked out at Argentina's Diego Simeone. It was a soft, silly, retaliatory flick, but Simeone, a master of the dark arts, went down as if struck by a sniper. The red card was immediate. England, down to 10 men, eventually lost on penalties. The nation, in its grief, needed a scapegoat. They found one. The tabloids printed his face on a dartboard. He was booed, mercilessly, at every single away stadium in his own country for an entire year. An effigy of him was hung from a lamppost outside a London pub. He had gone from golden boy to public enemy number 1. His journey since that day had been one of quiet, painful redemption. He had matured, grown, and been handed the ultimate responsibility, the captain's armband. And through the qualifying campaign for the 2002 World Cup, he had been immense. He wasn't just the captain, he was the engine, the heart, and the lungs of the team. He had dragged a talented but inconsistent England side almost by himself to the brink of qualification. And so it all came down to this. October the 6th, 2001. A grey, nervous afternoon at Old Trafford in Manchester, his home stadium. The opponent was Greece. The equation was, as always, brutally simple. England needed to match or better Germany's result against Finland. Germany were, of course, expected to win. Therefore England had to win. A draw or a loss would almost certainly condemn them to a terrifying two-legged playoff against Ukraine, a 50-50 coin flip for their World Cup lives. The stadium was a pressure cooker. The 65,000 fans were not there to be entertained. They were there to witness a formality, to get the job done, and to exhale. But Greece famously had not read the script. They had nothing to play for but their own professional pride, and that made them the most dangerous opponents imaginable. They were relaxed, organised, and utterly unimpressed by the occasion. England, by contrast, were a walking nervous breakdown. They were rigid with fear. Passes went astray. Tackles were missed. The slick, confident team that had sensationally beaten Germany 5-1 in Munich just a month earlier was gone, replaced by 11 strangers who looked like they'd just met in the car park. The anxiety rolled down from the stands and onto the pitch, suffocating them, and Greece, the party spoilers, took the lead. Angelos Charisteas, a name nobody in the stadium knew, drifted in at the back post and headed home. 1-0. A stunned, horrified silence fell over Old Trafford. This was not in the plan. This was a disaster. At half-time, the news from Germany was impossibly good. 0-0. As it stood, England was still, just barely, in the automatic spot. Coach Sven-Göran Eriksson, a man whose heart rate famously never rose above mild interest, made a change, bringing on the veteran Teddy Sheringham, the hero of 1989. It worked, almost instantly. Sheringham, a man born for tense moments, bundled home an equaliser. 1-1. The stadium roared in relief. The script was corrected for exactly 60 seconds. From the restart, Greece strolled forward. England's defence, still mentally celebrating, parted. Demis Nikolaidis, another name that would become a pub quiz answer, found himself in space and calmly slotted the ball past the keeper. 2-1 to Greece. It had taken less than a minute. The hope, the relief, the brief explosion of joy, it all vanished. Now there was only despair. News filtered through. Germany was still drawing 0-0. A draw would be enough. But England weren't drawing. They were losing. The game entered its final 20 minutes, and it was here that the match ceased to be England versus Greece. It became David Beckham versus the entire nation of Greece, versus the clock, versus his own history. He was a man possessed. He was, famously, not the quickest player, nor the best dribbler. But his right foot was a wand, and his stamina was superhuman. He was everywhere. He was at right back, making desperate sliding tackles. He was in central midfield, demanding the ball, spraying passes. He was on the wing, whipping in crosses. He was screaming at his teammates, pulling them up by their bootstraps, a captain refusing to let his country fail. He was playing with a desperate, beautiful, terrifying fury. The game entered stoppage time. 90 minutes were gone. The board went up. 3 minutes. The same 3 minutes that had saved his club in Barcelona. Could they now save his country? England looked broken. The fans were silent, many already streaming for the exits, resigned to the agony of the playoffs. 2 minutes of stoppage time elapsed. 92 minutes. England were launching hopeful, pathetic long balls. Greece cleared them with ease. It was over. And then, at 92 minutes and 30 seconds, Teddy Sheringham, in a final act of veteran savvy, was bundled over by a tired Greek defender. A foul, about 30 yards out, maybe a little more. Central but slightly to the left. This was it. The last kick of the game. The entire stadium knew it. The entire country knew it. Here's a quirky, agonising tidbit. This was not Beckham's first free kick of the match. He'd had several, and every single one of them had been, by his godlike standards, awful. He'd hit the wall, he'd ballooned one into the stands, he was visibly running on fumes, his legs were jelly, his iconic curtains hairstyle matted with sweat. He looked less like a global superstar and more like a Sunday League player who had just run a marathon. He placed the ball, he took 4 steps back, Old Trafford was so quiet you could hear the camera shutters. This was it. The playoff, the failure, the redemption, the World Cup, all of it, balanced on this one kick. He ran up. The pose is now history. The right arm flung back for balance, the left arm pointing, the body arched over the ball. He struck it, and it was perfect. It was the absolute platonic ideal of a David Beckham free kick. It flew up over the leaping Greek wall with a trajectory that seemed impossible. For a split second, it looked like it was going too high, and then, as if pulled by a string, it dipped. It dipped, it curled, and it flew with ferocious pace into the absolute postage stamp top left corner of the goal. The Greek goalkeeper, Antonios Nicopolidis, did not move. He was a statue. He could only turn and watch as the net bulged behind him. 2-2. The sound. The sound was not a cheer. It was a detonation. It was 65,000 people releasing every ounce of tension, fear and anxiety in a single, primal, guttural roar. Beckham, his face a mask of violent, ecstatic release, wheeled away, arms outstretched, screaming, just screaming at the crowd. He was buried under a pile of every single England player, coach and substitute. The entire nation had just exhaled. The referee, stunned, allowed Greece to kick off, and then immediately blew the final whistle. It was over. 2-2, Germany's 0-0 draw, meant England were going to the World Cup. Commentators still argue whether it was the single greatest act of individual redemption in English football history. But for the man who'd been a national pariah, it was something simpler. It was absolution, delivered from his own right foot. If Beckham's goal was about the redemption of one man in the eyes of a nation that always cares, there exists a stranger, perhaps more modern phenomenon. It is the goal that makes a nation care, a nation that, by and large, considers this sport a foreign curiosity, a pleasant diversion to be watched every 4 years before returning to their real games of baseball, basketball, and American football. The United States and soccer have a long, complicated, and often indifferent relationship. But on June 23, 2010, in the heart of South Africa, one man and one moment dragged 300 million people out of their seats with a single, desperate poke of a football. The setting was the 2010 World Cup. The sound, the inescapable, droning soundtrack of that summer, was the vuvuzela, and the man was Landon Donovan. Donovan was the face of American soccer, a golden boy who had borne the impossible weight of trying to make his country fall in love with the game he loved. He was talented, he was fast, but he was also for many the symbol of American soccer's limitations. Good, but never, ever great. The United States team had entered their final group stage match against Algeria in a state of profound frustration. This was, after all, the group of death by embarrassment. They had secured a shocking, lucky 1-1 draw with England, thanks to a now infamous goalkeeping blunder from England's Robert Green, who fumbled a simple shot into his own net. Then, against Slovenia, they had authored one of the most frustrating moments in US sports history. After going down 2-0, they had heroically clawed their way back to 2-2. In the dying minutes, Marissa Dou volleyed home what was clearly a winning goal, only for the referee Koman Koulibaly to inexplicably, and without any explanation then or since, disallow it. The US had been robbed, they were furious, and now they were desperate. The equation for this final match, played in the Loftus Versfeld Stadium in Pretoria, was simple. England and Slovenia were playing simultaneously. With England winning their match 1-0, the United States had to win, a 0-0 draw, and they were going home. Algeria, also needing a win, were not just sitting back. They were dangerous, fast, and desperate themselves. What unfolded for 90 minutes was not football. It was a national anxiety attack broadcast live on television. The US team, rigid with the same fear that had gripped Beckham's England, was awful. But they were also relentlessly trying. They were all heart and no finesse, a frantic, chaotic mess of lunging tackles and hopeful punts. The chances came, and the chances were missed. Clint Dempsey, the team's snarling, combative star, hit the post. Then, in a moment of cruel, cosmic déjà vu, Dempsey had a goal of his own disallowed for an offside call so impossibly close it felt less like a decision and more like a curse. It was happening again. The universe, the referees, the very fabric of the game was conspiring to keep them out. A quirky and painful tidbit from that day. This was not the first time the USA had been in this position. In 2006, they had needed a result in their final group game against Ghana and had failed, crashing out in bitter disappointment. This felt identical. The narrative was already being written by commentators back home. A brave, plucky effort, but ultimately the Americans just weren't good enough. The 90-minute mark passed. The fourth officials' board went up. 4 minutes. 4 minutes of stoppage time. It felt less like a lifeline and more like an insult. 4 more minutes to twist the knife. The US players were visibly exhausted, their shoulders slumped. The fans in the stadium, many wearing patriotic star-spangled outfits, were silent, their faces a picture of resignation. Back in the United States, where millions were gathered in bars and public squares, a cultural phenomenon in itself, the mood was funereal. The clock ticked. 90-15. 90-30. Algeria had the ball. They too were exhausted and content to play for the 0-0 draw that would eliminate both teams but at least give them a point. Then, at 90 minutes and 51 seconds, the script was torn to shreds. It began with a moment of competence that felt, in the context of the game, like a miracle. The US goalkeeper, Tim Howard, a man with the imposing bald head and beard of a warrior monk, calmly plucked an Algerian cross out of the air. He did not, as every other player on the pitch would have, fall on the ball and waste the precious few seconds that remained. He saw, 100 yards away, Landon Donovan. And in one violent, explosive movement, Howard hurled the ball, a flat, perfect quarterback's throw, halfway down the field. Donovan, running on fumes, collected it. He was one man against a sea of retreating green shirts. He ran. He ran until his legs screamed, carrying the entire hope of the nation on his back. He drove into the final third and slid a pass to his right, to Josie Altidore. Altidore, a powerful striker who had done nothing all day, found one last burst of energy. He muscled past his defender and drilled a low, hard cross into the 6-yard box. The ball was aimed at Clint Dempsey. Dempsey, the man who had been denied twice, launched himself at it. He collided in a painful, desperate heap with the Algerian goalkeeper, Rice Mabolhi. The ball struck Maboli's chest and squirted loose. For a single, agonizing fraction of a second, the ball rolled, ownerless, in the penalty area. The game, the World Cup, the fate of US soccer, all hung in that tiny suspended moment. And then he appeared, Landon Donovan. The man who had started the move, the man who had run 70 yards, had never stopped. He had followed his own pass, a cardinal rule taught to 6-year-olds. The ball rolled directly, perfectly into his path. The goal was gaping. He didn't think, he didn't panic, he didn't blast it, as a lesser player might, into the stands. He simply passed it, with the calm, certainty of a man who knew he was about to make history, into the back of the net. The sound that followed was not a cheer. It was an explosion. It was 90 minutes of unbearable, suffocating tension, released in a single primal scream. Donovan, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending ecstasy, sprinted to the corner flag, a C for captain on his armband. His finger pointed to the sky before he was buried under an avalanche of blue shirts. The entire US bench, coaches, trainers, and substitutes sprinted the length of the field and piled on. Analysts and historians still debate whether this single goal was the JFK moment for American soccer, the day the sport finally broke through the mainstream barrier, or if it was just another quadrennial sugar high. But in that moment, it didn't matter. In bars from New York to Los Angeles, in town squares in Kansas City, videos captured the exact same scene. A slow, agonizing build-up of groans, followed by a singular, unified detonation of joy. It was the first time since 1930 that the USA had won their World Cup group, a fact made even sweeter by the news that their 1-0 win, combined with England's 1-0 win, meant the inferior Americans had finished above their English teachers. It was a goal that, for one shining, explosive day, made an entire, indifferent nation care. That single, explosive moment in Pretoria was a flashbulb, an instance of sporting joy so potent it united an entire, sprawling continent for a day. It was about national pride, a nation proving, mostly to itself, that it could care. But there is another kind of pressure. A pressure that is in many ways more intimate, more desperate, and far more terrifying. It is not the pressure of national pride, it is the pressure of money, the suffocating, life-altering, generational wealth kind of money. This pressure lives in the English Championship, the second tier of football, a brutal 46-game war of attrition. The prize for escaping it, for climbing into the gilded paradise of the Premier League, is known simply as the richest game in football. It is the playoff final, a single match worth, at the time, an estimated £120 million. But before you get to that final, you must survive the semi-final. And on May 12, 2013, at a packed, sun-drenched stadium called Vicarage Road, Watford Football Club was playing Leicester City for that very right. The two teams were locked in a stalemate. The first leg at Leicester had ended 1-0 to the home side. Now after 90 frantic minutes in the second leg, Watford were winning 2-1. This meant the aggregate score was 2-2. The players were dead on their feet, their legs screaming, their lungs burning. The 90 minutes were up. The referee, Michael Oliver, had indicated a seemingly endless 6 minutes of stoppage time. The crowd was a nervous wreck, a sea of yellow shirts living on adrenaline and shredded nerves. Extra time loomed. 30 more minutes of this unbearable torture. 6 of the 6 added minutes had been played. The clock was at 96. This was, by any definition, the last possible second of the game. A Watford attack broke down, and Leicester's French winger, Anthony Knockaert, a man who had been a buzzing, annoying gnat all day, picked up the ball. He jinked into the Watford penalty area. A tired Watford defender, Marco Cazzetti, stuck out a lazy leg. Knockaert, sensing the contact, went down. He went down in a way that suggested a deep and profound betrayal by the laws of physics, a theatrical, sprawling tumble that was as much a plea as it was a fall. The referee, in the worst possible position, bought it. He blew his whistle, and he pointed to the penalty spot. The stadium died, a collective guttural groan of 15,000 people, seeing their dream publicly executed. The Leicester bench exploded, a blue tide of substitutes and coaches sprinting down the touchline in joy. The Watford players were apoplectic, surrounding the referee, their faces masks of pure disbelieving rage. But it was done. This was it. 96 minutes and 30 seconds. Leicester City had a penalty to win the tie and go to Wembley. The dream was over. The man who had won the penalty, Knockaert, immediately grabbed the ball. This, in itself, was a breach of protocol. The team's designated penalty taker was David Nugent, a man who had been reliable all season. But Knockaert, buzzing on pure, uncut adrenaline, was having none of it. He was the hero. This was his moment. Analysts and Leicester fans still argue to this day, in hushed, bitter tones, whether the entire course of history would have changed if Knockaert had just let the professional do his job. He placed the ball. Behind the goal, the Watford fans were a wall of noise and fury, waving their arms, screaming, a last desperate attempt to unnerve him. In the goal stood Manuel Almunia. This was not some second-tier journeyman. This was the former Arsenal goalkeeper, a man who had played in the 2006 Champions League final. He was here, in the twilight of his career, for one last moment. Knockaert stepped back. The whistle blew. He ran up and struck the ball, not with power, but with placement, aiming for the keeper's right. Almunia, guessing correctly, dove. He got a strong hand to it, palming the ball away. A great save. But the danger was not over. The ball rebounded. It spun, horribly, perfectly, right back into the path of the onrushing Knockaert. The goal was gaping. The keeper was on the floor. All Knockaert had to do was tap it into the empty net. He swung his left foot, and Almunia, still on the ground, in an act of impossible, superhuman reflex, threw his body backwards and blocked the rebound. It was a double save, a miracle, a moment of such profound no that it seemed to bend reality. But the ball was still loose. It bounced to an anonymous Watford defender who, in a state of pure animal panic, did not try to control it. He just hoofed it. A massive, desperate punt as far up the pitch as his shaking legs would allow. It was a clearance, a prayer. The ball sailed up, 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 and found Fernando Forestieri near the halfway line. He controlled it, surrounded by 2 Leicester players who were still processing the penalty miss. In a moment of sublime, ridiculous calm, Forestieri backheeled the ball to his teammate Jonathan Hogg. Hogg took one touch, looked up, and saw a glorious, terrifying, bald-headed freight train moving through the centre of the pitch. It was Troy Deeney. This was a man with a story. The quirky and very serious tidbit is that Deeney, the club captain and talisman, had been in prison just months earlier for a fray. His career was supposed to be over. The club had stood by him, and this entire season was his repayment, his redemption. Hogg, without a second thought, lofted a high, hopeful cross towards the edge of the box. A teammate, Mate Vidra, rose and nodded the ball down perfectly into the path of the charging Deeney. The clock read 96 minutes and 48 seconds. It had been perhaps 15 seconds since Almunia's save. The ball sat up, a perfect, inviting bounce 12 yards from goal. Deeney did not think. He did not aim. He unleashed hell. He struck the ball with every ounce of his power, every day of his prison sentence, every second of his redemption. The ball flew, a white blur, past the despairing dive of Kasper Schmeichel, son of Peter, the hero of 1999, and exploded into the roof of the net. Goal. What happened next was not a celebration. It was a breakdown of civilization. Deeney, in a fit of pure, primal rage and joy, ripped his shirt off and spun it, leaping into the crowd, a terrifying, muscular vision of ecstasy. The commentator famously just screamed, "Here's Hogg! Deeney, do not scratch your eyes! You are seeing the most extraordinary finale to a football match, ever!" And the fans, they just spilled. From all four sides of the stadium, a yellow tsunami of humanity poured onto the pitch. The game was, technically, not over. There were still seconds on the clock, but it didn't matter. The pitch was gone. It was a sea of people, weeping, screaming, hoisting their captain onto their shoulders, and the camera, in its beautiful, cruel way, cut back. 100 yards away, alone on the turf, face down, was Anthony Knockaert. The man who was seconds from being the hero was now the villain, weeping uncontrollably into the grass. It was the football equivalent of proposing to your girlfriend, only to have her see your best man, fall in love, and elope with him in the 20 seconds it took you to get the ring out. From save to double save to clearance to back heel to cross to header to goal in 20 seconds. It was not a last-minute goal. It was a last-second, £120 million counter-attack that redefined what was possible in the dying moments of a game. The pandemonium at Vicarage Road was a localised tribal explosion. It was the thrill of the chase, the sudden, violent acquisition of hope and by extension a massive pile of money. It was the magic of the domestic leagues. But there is a different kind of magic, a darker, more expensive and more obsessive kind. It is the quest for the continental crown, the European Cup, the UEFA Champions League. And for one club, that quest had become a curse. It was a £1 billion obsession, the single, defining goal of its oligarch owner Roman Abramovich. And for Chelsea Football Club, it was a journey defined by nothing but heartbreak. They had been closer than anyone. They had tasted it. The mainstream historical fact that hung over the club like a funeral shroud was the 2008 final in Moscow. In the pouring, freezing Russian rain, against their bitter rivals Manchester United, it had all come down to a penalty shootout. Their captain, their leader, John Terry, had stepped up with the kick to win the cup, and he had slipped. His standing foot gave way on the sodden turf, his shot hit the post, and United went on to win. It was a moment of such profound Shakespearean tragedy that it seemed to set the narrative in stone. Chelsea were not allowed to win this trophy. A year later, in 2009, they were robbed. A semi-final against Barcelona, where a series of blatant, almost comically biased refereeing decisions denied them victory, ending with Andrés Iniesta scoring a last-minute goal to send Barcelona through. It was a fuss-seeming disgrace, as their star striker Didier Drogba famously screamed into a television camera, earning himself a suspension. The club was star-crossed, cursed and haunted. And so we arrive at May 19th, 2012, the Champions League final. The opponents? Bayern Munich, the same German giants who had been so cruelly undone in 1999. But this was not a neutral ground. In a twist of fate so cruel it felt like a setup, the 2012 final was being held at the Allianz Arena in Munich. This was not a final. This was a home game for Bayern. The stadium was a sea of 70,000. screaming, arrogant Germans with only a tiny brave pocket of blue huddled in the corner. Chelsea did not just limp into this final, they crawled. Their season had been a catastrophe. Their expensive new manager had been sacked. They were being led by their former player Roberto Di Matteo, an interim manager, who was by all accounts just a caretaker. And like Manchester United in '99, they were decimated by suspensions. Their captain, John Terry, was out. Their key defender, Branislav Ivanovic, was out. 2 starting midfielders, Ramirez and Raul Meireles, were out. They were so short of players that Di Matteo was forced to give a 22-year-old named Ryan Bertrand his first ever Champions League appearance, in the final. It was a quirky, terrifying tidbit of trivia, the equivalent of a music student's first recital being a solo at Carnegie Hall. What unfolded was not a football match, it was a siege. For 83 minutes it was an attack versus defence training drill. Bayern, playing at home with their full-strength team, were relentless. They were a red tide led by the flying wingers Arjen Robben and Frank Ribéry. They passed, they shot, they dominated. Chelsea survived. This was not a team of young hopefuls. This was Chelsea's old guard, a core of players who had seen it all and lost it all. Petr Cech in goal, Ashley Cole, Frank Lampard and the Warrior King himself, Didier Drogba. They were all in their 30s. They knew this was it. This was their last impossible chance. They threw their aging bodies in front of everything. Cole made a goal line clearance. Cech made a string of world-class saves. Bayern hit the woodwork. It was a desperate, ugly, beautiful act of defiance. They were not playing to win. They were playing to not lose. They were hanging on by their fingernails, fueled by nothing but the scar tissue of Moscow and Barcelona. And then, at 83 minutes, the string snapped. A hopeful cross from the right. The German superstar Thomas Müller, a man who looks more like a village baker than a world-class athlete, drifted in at the back post. He got above his defender and looped a header down, into the ground. It bounced, cruelly, over the despairing dive of Petr Cech and into the roof of the net. 1-0, the stadium detonated. The sound of 70,000 Germans celebrating their coronation in their home was absolute. The curse was real. The dream was dead. The Chelsea players fell to their knees. Drogba, the man who had screamed into the camera 3 years prior, just stood in the centre circle, his hands on his hips, staring into the sky. It was over. The clock ticked. 84 minutes. 85. The Bayern fans were singing, their scarves whirling. 87 minutes. Chelsea, in a final, pathetic, dying gasp, won a corner. It was, almost comically, their first corner of the entire match. Bayern had taken 17. Their small Spanish midfielder, Juan Mata, trotted over. He looked exhausted, defeated. He raised his hand and whipped in a cross, not with hope, but with duty. It was aimed at the near post, and he rose. Didier Drogba, the man who had been sent off in the 2008 final. The man who had carried this team on his back for 8 years. He moved with a speed and power that defied the 88 minutes of chasing he had just endured. He got in front of his marker, Jérôme Boateng, and met the ball, not with a glance, but with a violent, concussive snap of his neck. It was a header of pure, unadulterated rage. Manuel Neuer, the German goalkeeper, perhaps the best in the world, was a fraction of a second late. He got a hand to it, but the power was too much. The ball exploded into the top corner of the net. 1-1. Silence. The most beautiful, profound, soul-lifting silence as 70,000 German fans were struck dumb. The only sound was the tiny blue corner, a pocket of humanity that just detonated. Drogba sprinted away, his face a mask of primal fury, sliding on his knees, screaming at the gods who had dared to write him off. Historians and football romantics still argue whether Chelsea's 2012 run was the greatest tactical rope-a-dope in history, or simply the most profound case of pure, unadulterated, written in the stars destiny. That goal did not win the cup. It only saved them. It bought them 30 more minutes of torture. In that extra time, Drogba, the hero, would concede a penalty. But Cech, the goalkeeper, saved it from Arjen Robben. It was as if fate was now toying with them, pulling every string. It led inevitably to a penalty shootout, and in that shootout, after all the pain of Moscow, it came down, of course, to the final kick. The man stepping up to win the cup was Didier Drogba. The script was almost too perfect. He placed the ball, calm, serene. He looked at Neuer. He took a short run up, and he rolled it gently, lovingly into the bottom left corner as the keeper dived the wrong way. The wait was over, the curse was broken. The header had not won the cup, but it had bought the redemption. Didier Drogba's header was an act of defiant resurrection, an 88th minute refusal to accept a pre-written tragedy. It was the climax of a club's cursed, obsessive quest. But 2 years earlier, the world had gathered in South Africa for the greatest spectacle of all, the World Cup. And in that final, the clock had ticked far, far past the 88th minute. It had entered that strange, breathless twilight zone of extra time, where players are no longer athletes but walking ghosts, running on memory and adrenaline. This was not about saving a match. It was about conquering the world. And it was a final that had become so ugly, so brutal, that it felt less like a football match and more like a 90-minute mugging. The date was July 11th, 2010. The stadium was Soccer City in Johannesburg, a vibrant calabash shimmering in the cold African night, its ear-splitting hum provided by 90,000 vuvuzelas. The finalists were Spain and the Netherlands. This was not just a match. It was a battle for football's very soul. On one side, Spain. This was the golden generation, a team of small, brilliant artists, Xavi, Andrés Iniesta, David Villa, who had perfected a mesmerising, hypnotic style of play known as tiki-taka. It was a philosophy built on possession, on endless, dizzying, triangular passes. They were the reigning European champions, the high priests of the beautiful game. On the other side, the Netherlands, a nation famed for inventing total football in the 1970s, a style of fluid, interchangeable, attacking art. But this 2010 Dutch team was a betrayal of that legacy. They were a cynical, snarling, brutalist machine, led by the midfield enforcers Mark van Bommel and Nigel de Jong. They had reached the final not by dazzling, but by fouling, kicking, and strangling the life out of every team they played. The final, therefore, became a simple question. Could art survive an assault by sheer, unadulterated violence? For 90 minutes, the answer appeared to be no. The referee, an Englishman named Howard Webb, found himself in the middle of a war he could not control. The Dutch tactic was simple. If you can't get the ball, kick the man. They were relentless. They hacked at ankles, they pulled shirts, they lunged into tackles with a savagery that was shocking for a World Cup final. The match devolved into a chaotic stop-start mess of whistles, arguments and writhing bodies. The defining moment of this ugliness, the image that would be replayed for eternity, came 28 minutes in. The Spanish midfielder, Xabi Alonso, chested down a high ball. From his blind side, Nigel de Jong, the Dutch hatchet man, launched himself into the air. He did not go for the ball. He went studs first, in a full-on martial arts jump kick, straight into the centre of Alonso's chest. It was a clear, unambiguous red card offence. It was an assault. Howard Webb, in a moment of baffling leniency that set the tone for the entire match, gave him a yellow card. The Spanish players were apoplectic. The world was stunned. But the message was clear. The Dutch could get away with anything. And so the game dragged on. It was a 0-0 slog of profound, agonising awfulness. Spain, the artists, were dragged down to the level of a back-alley brawl. The match set a new, grim, mainstream record for a World Cup final. Howard Webb issued 14 yellow cards and eventually 1 red. It was a festival of cynicism. Arjen Robben, the Dutch winger, had a golden one-on-one chance to win it, but was denied by the outstretched boot of the Spanish goalkeeper, Iker Casillas. The 90-minute whistle blew, a small mercy. The score was 0-0. The game entered extra time, 30 more minutes of this torture. The players were exhausted. The tension was unbearable. And finally, the Dutch cynicism caught up with them. The defender John Heitinga, already on a yellow card, cynically hauled down Andrés Iniesta and was given his second yellow, a red card. He was gone. The Netherlands were down to 10 men for the final gruelling minutes. Now Spain had the advantage. The artist had a sliver of space. But the Dutch, masters of the dark arts, simply retreated into a 10 men behind the ball shell. They were playing for penalties, the coin flip of a shootout. The clock ticked past 110 minutes. 115 minutes. It felt destined for the lottery of penalties, A cruel way to decide the ugliest of finals. Then, at 116 minutes, with just 4 minutes left before the whistle, the ball was cleared from the Dutch penalty area. It fell to the Spanish substitute Cesc Fabregas. He controlled it. He looked up, and he saw a tiny darting run from the man who had been kicked and battered all night, Andrés Iniesta. Iniesta, the pale, quiet genius from a small village, the man who, a year earlier, had scored the last-minute goal against Chelsea, a painful callback for Drogba's fans, to send Barcelona to that final. He was ghosting into the right side of the penalty area, finding a pocket of space that hadn't existed for 2 hours. Fabregas threaded the pass. It was perfect. The ball bounced once. The Dutch goalkeeper, Martin Stekelenburg, came hurtling out. A defender was sliding in, a last desperate lunge. Iniesta let it bounce. He let it drop to the perfect height. And with a swing of his right boot, he met the ball on the half volley, a shot of pure, unadulterated technique. It was not a blast. It was a crisp, perfect, undeniable strike. It flew past the keeper's hand and bulged the back of the net. 1-0. Spain. He did not run, not at first. He just stood, his hands to his head, in apparent shock. Then, he tore off his blue Spanish jersey, revealing a white t-shirt underneath. This was the quirky and profoundly human tidbit of the night. Scrawled on the shirt in messy blue ink were the words, Dani Jarque, siempre con nosotros. Dani Jarque, always with us. Dani Jarque was the captain of Espanyol, a rival club and a close friend of Iniesta's from the Spanish youth teams. He had died suddenly of a heart attack the previous summer at the age of 26. In the single greatest, most triumphant moment of his own life, Iniesta's first thought was to honour his fallen friend. It was a moment of pure, beautiful grace in a game that had been defined by its total absence. The Dutch were broken. The whistle blew minutes later. Spain, the nation that had forever been the talented underachievers, were world champions for the very first time. The Netherlands were runners-up for the third time, their brutalist tactics having failed at the last possible hurdle. Commentators and football philosophers still argue whether Spain's 2010 victory, secured with just 8 goals in 7 games, was the ultimate triumph of the beautiful game, or a pragmatic sign that even the greatest artists must learn to win ugly. But in that 116th minute, for one brief flash, beauty had finally violently broken through. Broken. If Andrés Iniesta's 116th minute goal was a flash of artistic justice in a brutalist brawl, the next World Cup final, 4 years later, would provide an echo. It was another 0-0 stalemate, another tense, suffocating affair, and another goal deep in the wastes of extra time. But this was not a battle of art versus cynicism. This was a battle of a relentless, flawless machine against one man's appointment with destiny. And in the 113th minute, the machine would prove that destiny is a fragile human concept. The stage was the Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, July 13th, 2014. It is perhaps the most sacred ground in all of football, a cathedral of the sport. The finalists were Germany and Argentina. It was a classic powerhouse final, a rematch of the 1986 and 1990 finals. But the narrative, the real story, was about the 2 paths they had taken to get there, and the one player who stood at the centre of it all. Germany was the machine. They were the national Mannschaft, a team that had been rebuilt from the ground up over a decade, a golden generation of players who were all, terrifyingly, at their absolute peak. They were athletic, they were technical, they were intelligent, and they were utterly ruthless. The mainstream historical fact, which will forever define that tournament, was what they had done in the semi-final. They hadn't just beaten the host nation Brazil, they had committed a crime. They had dismantled, humiliated, and systematically disemboweled Brazil in their own backyard, in front of a weeping, traumatised nation, to the tune of 7-1. It was a scoreline so shocking, so absurd that it looked like a typo. They were not just a team, they were an invading force. On the other side was Argentina. They were the immovable object, a team of grit, defence, and pragmatic, cynical resilience. They had not conceded a single goal in the entire knockout stage, winning their games 1-0, 1-0, and then, in the semi-final, 0-0 on penalties. They were a team of warriors, led by the snarling, indefatigable Javier Mascherano. And they had him. They had Lionel Messi. By 2014, Messi was already in the conversation as the greatest player to ever touch a football. For his club, Barcelona, he was a god, a wizard who had won everything, scored hundreds of goals and redefined what was possible on a pitch. But for Argentina, he was haunted. He was haunted by the ghost of one man, Diego Maradona. In 1986, Maradona, a flawed, chaotic but transcendent genius, had dragged a far less talented Argentina team to World Cup glory. It was the one defining achievement that Messi lacked. This was his chance. At 27, at his peak, in the rival's sacred stadium, this was his moment to seize Maradona's crown, to end the debate and to complete his own legend. The entire world outside of Germany was watching for this one act of coronation. The 90 minutes were a tactical, agonizing, high-stakes chess match. Germany, the machine, had all of the possession. Argentina, the counterpunchers, had all of the chances, and they were golden. Gonzalo Higuaín, the Argentine striker, was gifted a catastrophic back pass from a German defender. He was clean through, one-on-one with the German colossus, Manuel Neuer. It was the moment, and he scuffed it. He panicked, leaning back and sliced the ball horribly, embarrassingly wide. Later, he would score, wheeling away in celebration, only to be correctly and devastatingly ruled offside. Messi too had his chance. Early in the second half, he found a sliver of space, that impossible half-second, and curled a left-footed shot towards the far corner. The entire stadium, the entire planet held its breath. It rolled, and it rolled, just centimetres wide of the post. The machine, for all its dominance, was vulnerable, but destiny, it seemed, was having trouble kicking the door down. The whistle blew, 0-0, extra time. That familiar 30-minute purgatory where lungs burn and legs turn to stone. The German midfielder, Bastian Schweinsteiger, was a walking casualty, battered and bruised, at one point sporting a bloody gash under his eye, a testament to the brutal, grinding nature of the game. The 90-minute mark had passed, and the German manager, the impeccably dressed and perpetually calm Joachim Löw, had made a change. He took off the 36-year-old Miroslav Klose, the all-time leading World Cup goalscorer, a legend stepping off the stage, and he replaced him with a 22-year-old, a baby-faced kid with the number 19 on his back. His name was Mario Götze. He was Germany's wonder kid, the player they themselves had once hopefully dubbed the German Messi. As the second half of extra time began, with penalties looming, Löw pulled his young substitute aside. This is the quirky, almost apocryphal tidbit that has become legend. He whispered in Götze's ear. The words, later revealed, were simple and impossibly heavy. Go out and show the world you're better than Messi. Go and win the World Cup for us. It was not a tactic. It was an instruction to seize history. The clock ticked. 112 minutes. 113. It felt destined for the lottery. And then, the machine produced one final perfect gear change. Another substitute, Andrés Schürrle, found a reserve of energy that should not have existed. He surged down the left wing, brushing off two tired Argentine tackles. He looked up, and he saw Götze, the other substitute, making a clever darting run into the box. Schürrle whipped in a cross. It was a good ball, but it was high and slightly behind the young striker. What happened next was not a moment of desperation. It was a moment of pure, sublime, ice-cold technique. Götze, at a full sprint, did not try to head it. He did not try to control it with his feet. As the ball came over his shoulder, he puffed out his chest, and with the delicacy of a ballet dancer, he cushioned the ball, killing its pace, guiding it into his own path. The ball never touched the ground. Before it could, he swiveled his body, and in the same fluid motion, lashed a left-footed volley across the Argentine goalkeeper, Sergio Romero, and into the far corner of the net. 1-0. It was a goal of such staggering technical perfection that it felt almost unfair. The Maracanã, a stadium that had been hoping for a Messi coronation, was stunned. Götze, the super sub, wheeled away, a look of pure, childlike joy. The camera, as it always does, found the other man, Lionel Messi. He just stood, hands on his hips, in the middle of the pitch. That familiar vacant stare. The look of a man who had just watched his own ghost story being written. He would be forced, in a moment of almost comical cruelty, to accept the Golden Ball award for the tournament's best player, a golden trophy he held with the expression of a man accepting a speeding ticket. Historians and football pundits still argue whether that 2014 final was the moment that cemented Messi's tragic, always second international narrative, a story of a genius forever burdened by his country, or if it was simply the inevitable, logical triumph of the greatest team in the tournament. The German Messi had scored the goal that the real Messi was destined to, and in doing so had denied him the one thing he craved most. The miracle in Rio was the story of a substitute, a wonder kid stepping out of the shadow of the game's biggest star to snatch the world's greatest prize. It was a goal of sublime individual technique that settled a final. But sometimes, the drama is not about one final perfect touch. It is about a sustained 90-minute assault on the very concept of impossible. It is about a team, a stadium, and a city collectively deciding to reject a reality that has already been written. This is the story of a comeback so statistically absurd, so emotionally deranged, that it required a new name. La Remontada, the comeback. The stage was the UEFA Champions League, the round of 16 in 2017. The protagonists were FC Barcelona, the standard bearers of footballing art, the home of the most terrifying attacking trio ever assembled, Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, and Neymar Jr. They were known simply as MSN. Their opponents were Paris Saint-Germain, the nouveau riche superpower of France, a club bankrolled by the vast wealth of Qatar, a project built with one single, obsessive purpose: to win this very trophy. The story began, fittingly, in the city of love, Paris, on Valentine's Day. And it was not a romance, it was a massacre. The first leg at the Parc des Princes was supposed to be a tight heavyweight contest. Instead, it was the public execution of an era. Barcelona were not just beaten, they were humiliated, dismantled, and exposed. The final score was 4-0. PSG, led by a rampant Angel Di Maria and a dominant Marco Verratti, had run them off the pitch. The great Messi was a ghost. Suarez and Neymar were invisible. The tiki-taka philosophy looked old, slow, and dead. This is the central mainstream historical fact. In the 61-year history of the European Cup, no team had ever overturned a 4-goal first-leg deficit. 0-4 was not a deficit. It was a tombstone. It was a statistical black hole. It was, by every known law of football, over. The inquest in Barcelona was brutal. The media declared the dynasty dead. The manager, Luis Enrique, a man who had won the treble with this team just 2 years prior, looked broken. In the weeks that followed, he announced he would be resigning at the end of the season. The team was adrift. The dream was gone. PSG, meanwhile, were understandably triumphant. A quirky, and in hindsight, fateful tidbit. The club's official social media accounts were jubilant, and their players, like midfielder Adrien Rabiot, were pictured in the dressing room holding up 4 fingers, a gesture of dominance that would come back to haunt them. And so, on March 8, 2017, the teams gathered at the Camp Nou, Barcelona's 100,000-seat cathedral, for the second leg. It was a formality. It was a funeral. The PSG players arrived in Barcelona looking relaxed, ready to accept their coronation as Europe's new power. The Barcelona fans, by contrast, showed up not with expectation, but with a kind of blind religious faith. They were there to be witnesses, to cheer their fallen heroes, to sing the club anthem, Cant del Barça, with pride. In the pre-match press conference, Luis Enrique had said something that was dismissed as the ramblings of a desperate, soon-to-be unemployed man. "If they can score 4 goals against us," he said, his eyes burning with a strange, almost unhinged intensity, "we can score 6 against them." 6. It was a laughable, absurd number. The match began, the whistle blew, and the Camp Nou, a stadium that had been warned by its own manager that this would be a night for the clinically insane, produced a sound that was not a cheer, but a roar, a sustained 90-minute sonic assault. And in the 3rd minute, a goal, a frantic scramble, a hopeful hook into the box. Luis Suarez, the Uruguayan predator, ever the opportunist, lunged with his head and bundled the ball over the line. 1-0, the stadium exploded, but it was a cheer of pride, not of belief, a nice consolation. But Barcelona kept coming. They were not playing with their usual artistic flair. They were playing with a desperate, rabid intensity. They hounded the PSG players who suddenly looked small. They looked nervous, their legs heavy. the 4-0 lead feeling less like a cushion and more like a crushing weight. 5 minutes before halftime, the 40th minute. Andrés Iniesta, the hero of Johannesburg, chased a lost cause. He produced a magical, audacious back heel. The ball deflected off a panicked PSG defender, Layvin Kurzawa, and it wrong-footed his own goalkeeper. It trickled, almost apologetically, into the net. An own goal? 2-0. The halftime whistle blew, the stadium was buzzing. The impossible was now just the monumentally improbable. They were halfway there. They needed 2 more just to force extra time. The second half began 5 minutes in. Neymar, the Brazilian superstar who had been electric all night, jinked into the box and was tripped. A penalty. The referee, Deniz Aytekin, pointed to the spot. The stadium held its collective breath. Lionel Messi, the quiet king, the man who had been a ghost in Paris, stepped up. He placed the ball, and he blasted it with pure venomous power into the net. 3-0. It was the 50th minute. They had 40 minutes to find one more goal. The stadium was no longer a stadium. It was a living, breathing creature, a vortex of noise and belief. The PSG players were in a full-blown visible panic. Their superstars were hiding, their passes were errant, they were collapsing, and then, at the 62nd minute, the gut punch. The moment the dream died, PSG, in one of their only attacks of the entire game, launched a long free kick. The ball was headed down. And there, waiting, was their own Uruguayan striker, Edinson Cavani. He met the ball on the half-volley and exploded it into the roof of the net. Silence. A profound, sickening, funereal silence. It was 3-1. This was the true killer. The away goal. Analysts still argue whether this was the single most devastating away goal in modern history. Because of the away goal rule, a 3-1 scoreline meant that 4-1 wouldn't be enough. 5-1 wouldn't be enough. The 3-0 was gone. The slate was wiped. Barcelona, who had just clawed their way to the brink, now needed to score 3 more goals. They had to win 6-1. They had 28 minutes to do it. It was over. The fans began to leave. The impossible had been confirmed. The clock, now the enemy, began to tick remorselessly towards the 90th minute. The silence was deafening. It was the sound of 100,000 people having their hope, their collective irrational belief surgically removed. The 62nd minute. 3-1. Edinson Cavani's ferocious strike had not just hit the back of the net, it had punctured the very soul of the stadium. It was the away goal, the kill shot. That goal, which analysts still argue was the single most devastating away goal in modern history, meant that the equation had changed from difficult to mathematically absurd. Barcelona, who had clawed their way to 3-0, now needed another 3 goals just to win 6-1. They had 28 minutes. It was finally, definitively, over. The atmosphere evaporated. The sonic assault that had terrified the PSG players was gone, replaced by the hollow echoes of a funeral. On the pitch, the Barcelona players, who had been playing like men possessed, suddenly looked like they were running in wet sand. The fire in their eyes was extinguished. Luis Suarez stopped his frantic, rabid pressing. Messi, the barometer of the team's soul, just walked, his head down. The thousands of fans who had shown up for a miracle now began, in ones and twos, then in streams, to head for the exits. They couldn't bear to watch the final agonizing rites. For the next 25 minutes, the game simply died. It was a non-event. PSG, their arrogance flooding back, their legs suddenly light, passed the ball amongst themselves, playing with a casual, insulting confidence. Their billion-dollar superstars, Angel Di Maria and Julian Draxler, who'd been invisible, suddenly decided to showboat, flicking the ball, drawing lazy fouls. The PSG bench was laughing. The Barcelona players just watched. They were ghosts at their own wake. The clock, the cruel, ticking, impartial observer, drained away. 85 minutes, 86, 87. The game was dead. The greatest comeback in history had ended, not with a bang, but with a 25-minute whimper. And then, in the 88th minute, a flicker, a meaningless consolation. Barcelona won a free kick. It was about 25 yards out to the left of the goal. It was a perfect spot for Lionel Messi. But Messi, looking utterly defeated, let his teammate take it. It was Neymar. The Brazilian, who had been the single shining light of defiance all night, the only one who seemed to believe, placed the ball. He was perhaps just trying to give the few remaining fans something to cheer. He took a few short steps, and he struck it. It was a shot of pure, unadulterated technical perfection. It flew up over the leaping wall with a curl that seemed to defy physics. The PSG goalkeeper, Kevin Trapp, who had stood rooted to his line, took one pathetic, flapping step and just watched. The ball ripped into the top corner of the net, 4-1. It was by any measure one of the greatest free kicks in the competition's history, and it was met with polite applause, a beautiful goal, a wonderful footnote on a tragic night. The clock read 87:56. They still needed 2 more goals. There were 2 minutes left. But something shifted. The sound in the stadium changed. It was no longer a funeral. It was a jolt. The board went up. 5 minutes of added time. A sliver of what? Not hope, just time. Barcelona, in a final spasmodic headless chicken act of defiance, surged forward. 90 minutes. The ball was hoofed into the box. Luis Suarez, the master of chaos, chased it down. He jinked past the PSG defender, Marquinhos, who, in a moment of pure idiotic panic, fell clumsily, and his arm, his body, something seemed to clip the striker's legs. Suarez went down. He went down in a heap, screaming for a penalty. The stadium screamed with him. The referee, Deniz Aytekin, who had been at the centre of a controversial night, blew his whistle, and he pointed for a goal kick. He waved it away. The PSG players screamed at Suarez, accusing him of diving. It was over, but the referee was consulting his assistant. He was listening to the official in his earpiece. The Camp Nou was holding its breath. The PSG players, so calm moments before, were now a frantic, wide-eyed mess surrounding the official, and the referee, he changed his mind. He blew his whistle, and he pointed to the penalty spot. Pandemonium. Utter, shrieking, disbelieving chaos. The PSG players were apoplectic. Their entire 4-0 first leg lead, their entire season, their entire project, was now collapsing in on itself, reduced to a single 12-yard kick in the 91st minute. Commentators still argue whether PSG's collapse was a psychological failing of petrified players or a tactical one by a manager, Unai Emery, who had ordered them to sit back and invite this pressure. The ball was on the spot. But it wasn't Messi who stepped up. It was, again, Neymar, the man who had just scored the free kick, the man who believed. He placed the ball, the weight of 100,000 hopes, the burning hatred of the entire PSG team, the eyes of the world, all on him. He took his trademark stutter-step run-up, and he rolled it. He rolled it with an arrogance, a calmness that was inhuman, into the bottom right corner as the keeper dived the wrong way. 5-1. The stadium was not a stadium. It was a primal scream. It was 90-40. They were level on aggregate, 5-5, but it was not enough. The away goal. Cavani's ghost. It still haunted them. They still needed one more. They had 4 minutes to find it. What followed was not football. It was a riot. It was a fever dream. The PSG players' million-dollar superstars looked like they had forgotten how to walk, how to breathe. They kicked off. They gave the ball away instantly. Barcelona surged. PSG cleared it. Barcelona surged again. Every player was in the PSG half, including, in a final act of beautiful, glorious insanity, the Barcelona goalkeeper, Marc-André ter Stegen. He too was now a striker. 94 minutes. Ter Stegen, incredibly, was dribbling. He was fouled. A free kick. The last, desperate, final play of the game. Neymar. Of course, Neymar. He stood over the ball, 40 yards out. He looked up, and he floated it. It was not a good cross. It was a prayer. A hopeful, looping, desperate punt into a sea of bodies. The PSG defence, so dominant in Paris, rose and missed it. They headed it clear, but only partially. The ball came back to Neymar. He took a touch. The clock read 94 minutes and 39 seconds. The final whistle was seconds away. He looked up again. He could have shot. He could have crossed it hard. Instead, he just dinked it. A soft, delicate, hopeful chip over the top of the frozen, terrified defensive line. And someone was running. It wasn't Messi. It wasn't Suarez. It was Sergi Roberto, a substitute, a utility man, a defender, a jack of all trades who was the master of none. He had come on as a late, hopeless sub. He had seen the space. He ran and he stretched. He launched his entire body into the air, his right leg extended, reaching. He got a touch. His shin, his foot, it didn't matter. He just touched it. The ball, redirected, floated over the top of the despairing, sprawling goalkeeper. It nestled, softly, beautifully, into the back of the net. The stadium broke. For 1/10 of a second, there was a silence, a global collective gasp. Did that just happen? And then, the sound of 99,786 people witnessing a resurrection. It was a roar that was measured literally as a minor seismic event. Sergi Roberto, his shirt off, was at the bottom of a human pile. The entire Barcelona bench, coaches, doctors, substitutes, were on the pitch, weeping, screaming. The quirky and now iconic tidbit of the night was the photograph that would define an era. Lionel Messi, the quiet king, did not join the pile. He ran on pure adrenaline to the barrier and was hoisted up by the crowd, his arm raised, a messianic, godlike figure roaring at his people. Hic sunt leones, a Barcelona paper would write. Here be lions. On the field, the PSG players were just gone. They were on the grass. They were sitting, staring into the middle distance. Marco Verratti, the man who had dominated the first leg, was weeping. The final whistle blew. 6-1. They had done it. They had scored 3 goals in 7 minutes. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was, and will likely forever be, the single greatest comeback in the history of the sport. The 2017 Remontada was a monument to belief, a 90-minute siege of a terrified opponent. It was a heavyweight champion, wounded and enraged, reclaiming its throne. But 2 years later, the Champions League, a competition that seems to exist solely to produce these cinematic, heart-stopping scripts, served up something different. This wasn't a clash of titans. This was a fairy tale. The 2018-19 season was the year of the underdog, and the semi-final had produced the most romantic, unlikely pairing imaginable. Ajax of Amsterdam versus Tottenham Hotspur of London. This was not the Ajax of recent memory. This was a glorious, brilliant throwback. A team that had, seemingly overnight, resurrected the club's hallowed total football philosophy. They were a squad of kids, a vibrant, fearless, fluid collection of homegrown talent and clever acquisitions. This was a team with an average starting age of just 24, a kindergarten in Champions League terms. They had burst out of the qualifying rounds and proceeded to cut a swath through the heart of old money Europe. It is a mainstream historical fact that will define their legacy. In the knockout rounds, they had gone to the homes of the reigning champions, Real Madrid, and the home of Cristiano Ronaldo, Juventus, and had not just beaten them, they had humiliated them with a style of football so breathtaking, so audacious, that it made the whole world fall in love. They were led by their 19-year-old captain, Matthijs de Ligt, marshalled by the metronomic genius of Frenkie de Jong, and powered by the wizardry of Hakim Ziyech and Dusan Tadic. They were, by universal acclaim, the good guys. On the other side was Tottenham, Spurs, a club with a global reputation for one thing: failure. They were the bottle job club, a team defined by a history of Spursy moments, of almost, of nearly, of snatching catastrophic defeat from the jaws of victory. They, too, had no business being here. Their entire campaign had been a series of comical near-death experiences. They had, functionally, been eliminated in the group stage, only to be resurrected by a last-minute miracle goal from Lucas Moura, remember that name, against Barcelona. They had survived the most chaotic, VAR-defined, emotionally deranged quarter-final in history against Manchester City, a 4-3 loss that saw them, impossibly, win on away goals, thanks to a 93rd minute City goal being ruled out by a millimetre. They were a team of anxiety, grit and pure dumb luck. The first leg of the semi-final in London had gone to script. Ajax, calm and superior, had dominated, winning 1-0. Tottenham, missing their talismanic injured striker Harry Kane, had looked flat, starstruck and utterly outclassed. And so we arrive at the second leg, on May 8th, 2019, at the Johan Cruyff Arena in Amsterdam. The stadium was a carnival, a sea of red and white, a city preparing for its coronation, their first final in 23 years. The task for Tottenham was monumental. It became, within 5 minutes, impossible. A corner, The Ajax fans, already in full voice, roared, and there he was, the 19-year-old captain Matthijs de Ligt, rising like a man among boys, thundering a header into the back of the net. 1-0 on the night, 2-0 on aggregate. The carnival had officially begun. The Tottenham players, their faces already grim, now looked pale, their eyes wide with a familiar, "Here we go again," dread. But Ajax didn't just sit back. That wasn't their style. They wanted to dance. And at 35 minutes they produced the goal that should have been the epitaph for Tottenham's season. It was a move of pure, fluid, one-touch art. From their own box they sliced through Tottenham's frantic, disorganised pressing. The ball found Dusan Tadic, their Serbian false nine, who played a perfect disguised reverse pass. It rolled, beautifully, into the path of Hakim Ziyech, who met it with a first-time left-footed sweep that was pure poetry, curling it, perfectly, into the far corner of the net. 2-0. 3-0 on aggregate. It was a goal of such quality, such arrogance, such Ajax, that it was no longer a contest, it was a celebration. The camera found the Ajax manager, Erik ten Hag, a picture of calm satisfaction. It found the Tottenham manager, Mauricio Pochettino, a man who famously wore his heart on his sleeve, staring, ashen-faced at the turf. The half-time whistle blew. The sound in the stadium was deafeningly joyous. The Ajax players walked off, slapping each other on the back, waving to the crowd. The Tottenham players just trudged. Their shoulders were slumped. They were ghosts. They were dead. This was not the 3-0 against PSG. This was 3-0 on aggregate at half-time away from home against the most confident, in form, technically brilliant team in the world. They had 45 minutes to score 3 goals, just to tie. It was over. The commentators were reading eulogies. They were praising the romance of Ajax, discussing their likely opponents in the final. Liverpool, who in their own miracle the night before, had overturned a 3-0 deficit against Barcelona. Tottenham were a footnote. Analysts and football purists still debate whether this 2019 Ajax side was the most romantic, tactically brilliant team of the decade, a true throwback to the ideals of total football, or simply a brilliant flash in the pan. But as the teams went down the tunnel, that debate seemed settled. They were the future, and Tottenham were history. The teams walked back out onto the Amsterdam turf, not for a football match, but for an execution. The Ajax fans, a sea of red and white, were in full party mode, a joyous, deafening wall of sound celebrating their imminent, glorious return to the final. The Tottenham players looked like men walking to the gallows. They were 3-0 down on aggregate 45 minutes from home and had just been systematically dismantled by a team of kids who played like gods. The script was written. The story was over. Mauricio Pochettino, a man of profound, almost painful emotional intensity, had made a change. It was not a tactical tweak. It was an act of pure, unadulterated desperation. He had taken off a midfielder and brought on Fernando Llorente. Llorente was not a typical Tottenham player. He was a tall, gangly, 34-year-old Spanish target man, a plan B so crude it was practically a plan Z'd. He was, in essence, a human battering ram, and his introduction was a white flag on total football. Tottenham were abandoning all pretense of art. They were going to war. The second half began, and for 10 minutes, the war was a failure. Ajax, still coasting on their first half high, were in complete control. They were passing, they were strutting. And then, at the 55th minute mark, a flicker, a mistake. A quick, hopeful ball forward. It was not a work of art, it was a hopeful punt. But suddenly Dele Alli, a player who had been a ghost, found a burst of speed. He drove into the Ajax half. Lucas Moura, the small, tireless Brazilian winger, made a darting diagonal run. Ali saw him and slid the pass. Moura took one touch, and with the Ajax keeper Andre Onana rushing out, he coolly, calmly slotted the ball past him. 2-1 on aggregate 3-1. A goal! A ripple of polite applause from the tiny corner of travelling Tottenham fans. A brief, annoyed murmur from the Ajax crowd. It was a consolation, a goal for pride, nothing more. Ajax kicked off, still in total control. They were still 2 goals clear, at home, with 35 minutes to play. And then, 4 minutes later, the stadium's foundations began to crack. The 59th minute, another long, desperate, ugly ball. This was the Llorente effect. The Ajax defenders, so used to playing against neat, tidy strikers, had no idea how to handle this lumbering giant. The cross came in, Llorente bundled into the defence, and Onana, the keeper, who had been so calm, suddenly looked 23. He fumbled the ball. It was a spill, a moment of pure panic. The ball bounced loose in the 6-yard box. It was a scramble, a mess of legs. And there, in the middle of it all, was Lucas Moura. The ball was at his feet, but he was surrounded. He was in a phone box with 3 defenders. He had no right to do anything, but in a moment of sublime, close quarters, Brazilian futsal brilliance, he took 1 touch, 2, spun on a sixpence, and while falling, hooked his left foot around the ball and snapped a shot. It flew, hard and low, through a forest of legs, and into the back of the net. 2-2, 3-2 on aggregate. Silence. A sudden, piercing, sickening silence, as 50,000 Dutch fans had the air sucked from their lungs. This was not supposed to happen. In the space of 240 seconds, the party had turned into a nervous breakdown. The Ajax players, the fearless, brilliant kids, were now staring at each other with wide, panicked eyes. And the Tottenham players, the walking dead of halftime, they were alive. They smelled blood. What followed was not football. It was 30 minutes of pure, uncut, agonising chaos. The narrative, so clear at halftime, was shredded. The roles were reversed. Ajax, the team of art, was now the one collapsing, choking, gripped by a terror so profound it was visible. And Tottenham, the bottle job club, was now the relentless aggressor, throwing everything forward. The game became a frantic end-to-end mess. Ajax had chances to kill it. Of course they did. Hakim Ziyech, the scorer of that beautiful poetic goal, had a chance. He hit the post. The ball rolled, agonisingly, across the goal line and stayed out. It was a sign. The gods of football were watching, and they were, it seemed, deeply, deeply cruel. The 90 minutes were up. The 4th officials board went up. 5 minutes. 5 minutes of added time. 5 minutes for Tottenham to find 1 goal. 5 minutes for Ajax to just survive. Those 5 minutes were the longest in human history. 91. A Tottenham shot blocked. 92 on. An Ajax clearance, hoofed into the stands by a defender who looked like he was about to be sick. 93 on. A Tottenham cross caught by Onana, who then, in a moment of time wasting that would become his epitaph, fell to the ground and refused to get up. 94 on. The game was dying, the dream was dying, the clock was ticking. 94:30, 94:45, 95 minutes. The 5 minutes were up. This was it. The last play. A hopeful, desperate, sky-high punt from the back. It was not a pass. It was a prayer. Llorente, the battering ram, rose and won the header. Just won it, flicking it on. Dele Alli, running on legs that had ceased to exist, got his toe to the ball. It was a poke, a tired, desperate, nothing pass that just, somehow, squirted through a defender's legs. The clock read 95:01, and there he was, Lucas Moura, the man who had given them hope, the man who had given them belief. He had run, on pure instinct, into that one tiny pocket of space. The ball rolled perfectly into his path, his left foot, his weaker foot. He didn't think, he didn't look, he just hit it. It was not a thunderbolt, it was not a work of art, it was a low, skidding, hopeful shot destined for the bottom corner, and the stadium for one agonising cinematic second watched it roll. It rolled past the despairing slow-motion dive of Onana. It rolled, and it kissed the inside of the post, and it went in. 3-2. 3-3 on aggregate. Tottenham were winning on away goals. The explosion, the sound of the Tottenham players, the bench, the fans, the silence, the profound, desolate, heartbreaking silence of 50,000 people watching their fairy tale, their masterpiece being torn to shreds in the 96th minute. The Ajax players, to a man, just collapsed. They fell to the turf, their faces in the grass, their story, the greatest what-if story in modern football, dead. And the camera, in its beautiful, terrible way, found the man who had willed it into existence. Mauricio Pochettino. He was not celebrating. He was on his knees in the middle of the pitch, his head bowed to the grass. And he was weeping. Not crying. He was sobbing, uncontrollably. the tears of a man who had stared into the abyss of his club's entire history and for one impossible night had seen it blink. The tears of Mauricio Pochettino drying on the Amsterdam grass were tears of disbelief, of a curse broken, of an impossible fairy tale realised. It was the magic of the continent, a knockout competition where romance can, on its day, defy all logic. But there is another kind of pressure, a more gruelling, intimate and perhaps more painful pressure. It is the 40-week marathon of a domestic league season. It is not about one night of magic, it is about a year of relentless, grinding consistency. And in this arena, fairy tales are often suffocated by the brutal realities of history, money, and the crushing weight of expectation. For one club, that weight was measured in decades. The club was Manchester City. And for 44 years they had been a joke. This was not a club in the modern sense. It was a long-running tragicomedy, a case study in how to inflict the most imaginative, comical and spectacular forms of failure upon a loyal, masochistic fan base. While their crosstown rivals, Manchester United, were busy building a global empire, winning trophy after trophy under the terrifying, relentless stewardship of Sir Alex Ferguson, City were not. They were fumbling, they were failing, they were, at one point in the 1990s, relegated to the third tier of English football. They were defined by an intangible, malignant force known as typical City. A shared, knowing understanding that if there was a way to mess it up, they would find it. Then, in 2008, the punchline changed. The single most important mainstream historical fact of their existence occurred. The club was purchased by the Abu Dhabi United Group. This was not just new owner money, this was nation-state money. This was, functionally, infinite money. The club that had been a byword for failure was suddenly the richest in the entire world, and Sir Alex Ferguson, in his imperial fortress across town, was not amused. He saw the new, gaudy billboards, the influx of superstar players. He saw the shift, and he uttered the phrase that would define the rivalry. He dismissed them. They were, he said, just noisy neighbours, a new, annoying tenant in the city he owned. But the noisy neighbours were using their new wealth to build a fortress. They signed players of immense world-class stature. Yaya Touré, a colossus who could play like a midfielder and a striker at the same time. David Silva, a small Spanish wizard who could see passes no one else could. And, for a club record fee, they signed Sergio Kun Aguero, the son-in-law of Diego Maradona, a man who was pure predatory instinct in human form. The 2011-2012 season was the culmination of this new war. It was a two-horse race, a bare-knuckle brawl for the city's soul. City, under their cool, immaculately dressed Italian manager Roberto Mancini, were playing brilliant, attacking football. They had gone to Old Trafford, Ferguson's fortress, and in an act of unthinkable, glorious sacrilege, they had beaten Manchester United 6-1. The noise was becoming a roar. But typical City was not dead. It was just dormant. With just 6 games left in the season, City did what they always do. They choked. They lost to Swansea. They drew with Stoke. They lost to Arsenal. In the space of 3 weeks, they had thrown it all away. They were 8 points behind United. It was over. A reporter asked Ferguson if it was finished. He simply, chillingly replied, "Of course." A Ferguson-led United never dropped an 8-point lead, but they did. In the greatest collapse of his entire career, United lost to a tiny, relegation-threatened club, Wigan. And then, in a match that will live in infamy, they were winning 4-2 against Everton and drew 4-4. The door inexplicably was open. City, clawing their way back, won their games, including a tense, brutal 1-0 derby victory, a header from their captain Vincent Kompany. And so, it all came down to this. May 13th, 2012. The final day. After 37 games, the two teams were impossibly level on 86 points, but City were top. They were ahead on goal difference. The equation was simple. City had to play Queen's Park Rangers at home. United were playing Sunderland away. All City had to do was match United's result. Win, and the title was theirs. The stage was set for a coronation. The Etihad Stadium was not a place of nerves, it was a party. 44 years of pain, of mockery, of being the punchline were about to be washed away. The stadium was a sea of blue, and, bizarrely, inflatable bananas. This was the day's quirky tidbit. The bananas were a throwback, a symbol of the club's gallows humour from the 1980s. A trend started for a player named Imre Varadi, and they had become a beloved surreal icon of the old city. Today they were being waved not in irony, but in triumph. QPR were a terrible team, fighting relegation, but managed by a former City hero, Mark Hughes. Still, this was a formality. The first half was tense. City, visibly rigid with the pressure of 44 years, were trying too hard, but in the 39th minute the dam broke. A scruffy, deflected shot from their Argentine defender, Pablo Zabaleta, a man loved more for his heart than his finesse. It trickled over the line. 1-0, the stadium erupted. It was happening. Half-time came, 1-0 to City. Across the country at Sunderland, United were also winning 1-0. It didn't matter. As it stood, City were champions. And then, typical City arrived. It arrived in a form so cruel, so perfect, it was almost poetic. 3 minutes into the second half. A hopeful, nothing punt from QPR. The City defender, Jolyon Lescott, in a moment of inexplicable brain-scrambling panic, tried to head the ball back to his keeper. It was a catastrophic mistake. He headed it perfectly into the path of the QPR striker Djibril Cissé, who blasted it into the net. 1-1, the stadium died. A collective agonising groan. 1-1 was not enough. As it stood, United were champions. The panic was no longer a feeling. It was a physical, choking presence. Analysts still argue whether what happened next was the greatest manifestation of typical City, a karmic debt of 44 years coming due, or simply the most profound psychological collapse in 30 minutes of football. It got worse. City, frantic, were attacking. QPR's captain, Joey Barton, a man who was a walking red card, lashed out, elbowing Carlos Tevez. The referee saw it. Red card. QPR were down to 10 men, but Barton didn't go. In a fit of pure, chaotic rage, he kicked Sergio Aguero on his way off. He tried to headbutt Vincent Kompany. He had to be dragged from the pitch. This was it. Surely. City. Desperate. Against 10 men. And then, at 66 minutes, the script was not just torn up, it was set on fire. QPR, with their 10 men, had one single counter-attack. A cross. And Jamie Mackie, a man who stood 5'9", somehow rose and scored a header. 2-1 to Queen's Park Rangers. It was not possible. The stadium was a morgue. The inflatable bananas drooped. The party was over. The 90-minute mark arrived. The board went up. 5 minutes. 5 minutes of stoppage time. City were losing 2-1 at home to 10 men. The fans were crying. Not with joy. With a grief so profound, so familiar. They were streaming for the exits. At Sunderland, the whistle had blown. United had won 1-0. Their players were on the pitch, waiting, celebrating. They were champions. The 44 years had ended in the most City way imaginable. It was over. The stadium was a tomb. The game was in the 91st minute. 5 minutes of stoppage time had been awarded, but it was a kindness that felt more like a taunt. 5 more minutes for 50,000 people to sit with their grief. They were losing 2-1 to 10 men. The party was over. The 44 years of pain had, in a final exquisite act of cruelty, been condensed into these 90 minutes. The fans were weeping openly in the stands. The inflatable bananas, those surreal optimistic symbols, lay deflated on the concrete. A truly sad sight. Across England, in Sunderland, Manchester United's game was over. They had won. Their players stood on the pitch, a mixture of triumph and anticipation, watching the scenes from the Etihad on a tiny monitor, waiting for the whistle that would confirm their 20th league title. Sir Alex Ferguson, that old, relentless king, was smiling. It was done. The clock ticked. 91 rays. City, in a final spasmodic act, won a corner. David Silva, the little magician who had run out of tricks, trotted over to take it. He raised his hand, a tired, hopeless gesture. He floated the ball in. It was just another hopeful, desperate punt. A QPR defender headed it, but not clear. The ball looped up high towards the back post, and there, rising above the chaos, was Edin Dzeko. He was the tall, awkward Bosnian striker who had been a substitute, a man bought as an afterthought, overshadowed by the superstars. He was a plan B. But he rose, a giant of pure desperate will, and he thundered a header into the back of the net. 91-15. 2-2. A sound. A strange, shocked, guttural roar. A man in the crowd famously did not even celebrate. He just stood, his hands on his head, his face a mask of pure, agonised confusion. It was a goal. But it was not the goal. A 2-2 draw was not enough. United had 89 points. A draw would give City 87. They still needed one more. They had 3.5 minutes to find it. Dzeko, in a moment of pure clarity, did not celebrate. He sprinted into the goal, grabbed the ball and ran, screaming back to the centre circle, shoving QPR players out of his way. The 10-man QPR team, so close to a heroic draw that would save their season, were now in a full, unadulterated panic. They kicked off. City, in a blur of blue, swarmed them. They won the ball back instantly. 92 scanned a frantic pass, a blocked shot. 92 standard. The ball was hoofed clear. 93 Yildirim. The clock was red. The 5 minutes were almost gone. The stadium was just screaming. Not in hope, in noise, a constant primal agonising wall of sound. The ball was with a City defender, deep in his own half. He passed it desperately to Nigel de Jong, the midfield enforcer, the man whose primary job was to destroy, not to create. De Jong, with 44 years of history on his shoulders, pushed a simple 10-yard pass forward. It was not a pass of genius. It was a pass that said, please, someone, anyone. It found Mario Balotelli, Super Mario, the human embodiment of chaos, the man who had worn a Why Always Me shirt, the man who had set his own house on fire with fireworks. He was 25 yards from goal, his back to it, a defender climbing all over him. He was true to form, falling over. This was it. The last pathetic attack, ending at the feet of the club's glorious, talented, impossible man-child. But as he fell, as he was being tackled to the ground, Balotelli did something. It was, he would later claim, his only assist of the entire season. It wasn't, but it was so perfect a line that it became fact. In one final, accidental, brilliant, stumbling motion, he poked his right foot at the ball. He didn't look, he just stabbed it, blindly, into the one tiny pocket of space that had opened in the QPR defence. The clock read 93 minutes and 20 seconds, and he was there, Sergio Kun Aguero. He had been quiet all day, a ghost crushed by the weight of the moment. He had run on pure predatory instinct into that single shaft of light. The ball rolled, perfectly into his path. One touch, a perfect cushioned killer's touch, taking the ball away from the last lunging defender. He was in, 8 yards out. The near post was open. He did not look up. He did not think. He did not aim. He just hit it. He unleashed 44 years of failure, of mockery, of third-tier stadiums, of inflatable bananas, of typical City, of his crosstown rival's smug, smiling face, and he detonated it with his right foot. It was a shot of pure, unadulterated, violent release. The net did not just ripple, it exploded. The sound. There are no words for the sound. It was not a cheer, it was a physical event. It was a sonic boom that shook the foundations of the stadium, a single, unified, primal scream of 50,000 people witnessing a resurrection. The commentator, Martin Tyler, lost his grip on reality and passed into legend. Manchester City are still alive here. Balotelli. Aguero. He paused, his voice cracking, as the stadium itself seemed to vibrate. I swear you'll never see anything like this ever again, so watch it, drink it in. Aguero, in a state of pure ecstatic blackout, ripped his number 16 shirt off, spinning it around his head, his face a mask of disbelief. He was buried. The entire bench, Roberto Mancini in his impeccable suit, the substitutes, the medical staff, they were all on the pitch, in a pile of weeping, screaming, laughing humanity. And across the country, at Sunderland, the cameras found them. The United fans who had been celebrating their title were frozen. Their flags were down. A young fan was captured, his face a perfect silent O of dawning horror, and the camera found Sir Alex Ferguson. The smile was gone. His face, ruddy and shocked, was just vacant. He was chewing his gum faster and faster as he processed the fact that the title, his title, had been stolen from his grasp in the last 20 seconds of the season. The referee in Manchester let QPR kick off one last pointless time, and then he blew the whistle. It was over. 3-2. Manchester City were champions. Historians and football sociologists still debate whether the 93-20 moment was the final, spectacular death of typical City, or, in fact, its most perfect and triumphant expression. A victory, not of serene dominance, but one snatched with comical, self-inflicted, agonising difficulty from the very jaws of its own inevitable failure. It was, and perhaps always will be, the definitive, unbelievable, last-second moment. And with the echo of that roar, our journey for tonight comes to an end. The sound of 50,000 people, screaming as one, begins to fade, replaced by the soft, steady hum of the fan in your room. The stadium lights, which burned with the intensity of a dying star, have dimmed, and the pitch is now just a quiet, empty field of grass, resting under the cool night sky. The tension, the anxiety, the almost unbearable heart-stopping pressure of those final seconds, it all just melts away, dissolving into the stillness of your room. These moments of beautiful, terrifying chaos are what make the story. But they are just that. They are stories. They are flashes of madness, safely contained in the past. The adrenaline they produced was just a memory, and it too is now receding, replaced by a much more pleasant, much more welcome sensation. A gentle, creeping heaviness in your limbs, a comfortable warmth. The drama is over. The whistle has blown. There is nothing left to win, nothing left to fear. There is only the quiet of the present, the comfort of your bed, and the slow, easy, rhythmic pull of sleep, which now feels closer and more inevitable than any last-minute goal.